Hi, I'm Sam, and welcome to the Shoogly Stitch. Hi, I'm Sam, and if you're new to the channel, this is my podcast where I talk about anything relating to knitting, spinning, any other fiber crafts that I might decide to try. I'm originally from Washington State in the US, but I've lived in Scotland for the past 7 years or so. So that is the context for where I'm based as far as when I'm referring to different things that might be happening, events, my going to spinning guild, that kind of thing. If I do look off over here, I have a monitor set up so I can actually see what I'm filming, so that's all that's happening there. I may also occasionally mention my dogs. They show up in videos from time to time. Poppy is actually sitting on my lap just now, as she was not impressed to be left on the floor. So yeah, she may pop in, and luckily Rosie's just sleeping on the floor. So without further ado, let's get into finished objects. So I have quite a lot to share this week. It's been over a month, well, I think probably since December since I shared a proper podcast episode, so I finished a lot in that time. And I actually have 2 whole sweaters to share. The first thing to share is what I'm actually wearing today. This is the Anyday Sweatshirt by Isolde. And I finished this sometime in January. So I knit size 3. This is a drop shoulder sweater, and I'll stand up so you can see a little bit more of the details. So hopefully you can see a bit more here if I stand back. So it is a drop shoulder, if you look closely, although it's a relatively close fit. And it has a lot of really nice shaping. So you can see that the underarm sleeve here actually has a bit of a gusset. So you see that nice curve, rather than just being a rectangle here and another rectangle stuck on the side. It's there's quite a lot of shaping that makes this all fit together really nicely, so it's not quite as baggy as a lot of drop shoulder sweaters that you get. There's also this really cute sweatshirt kind of detailing that's actually really simple to do, just with a little bit of reverse stockinette. And then in the back, let's see if I can show you, you start the whole project by knitting this strip here that goes from one shoulder all the way across the back neck and across to the other shoulder. And then from there you actually pick up stitches and continue making the back wedge shaping like you do for kind of a normal drop shoulder sweater. So you knit that long strip in the back that I just showed you first. And that is the one thing that I did slightly wrong with this project, is that I knit that with too small of needles. I think maybe the next size up that I was meant to be using I didn't have, or I hadn't realized actually that I was meant to be using the normal size needle. I started it using a smaller size needle and I didn't want to undo it, and I was hoping that it would block out, and it mostly has. But if there's anything that is wrong with this project, it is just a little bit like tight there. There's no extra give in that line there. And I think what it would do is just keep a little bit of shape to it instead of letting the project stretch out, because there is that kind of structured slip stitch ridge, but it potentially is like actually holding it in a little bit too close. Overall, I'm really happy with the project. It's using up some yarn that I've had for ages, and that has been, I think, 2 different sweaters before this that just didn't quite work out. One of them because it had kind of a boat neck, which I really didn't like the fit of and wasn't ending up wearing. And then one of them was the Nurtured sweater by Andrea Mowry. And I think this might be a common issue with her patterns. The sleeves just ended up being way too tight. So while I like the texture and actually it would be a nice sweater to revisit, I couldn't just reknit the sleeves because of the texture. It was too hard to figure out how to pick that up without it being like really obvious where there was a line that I'd ripped out and restarted. So I finally was able to use it in a really kind of simple, comfortable sweatshirt style sweater that showcases the yarn. So the yarn is Madelinetosh Tosh DK in the color Fur Wreath, and it's a superwash yarn, but I don't really have any problems with that. I don't always need a woolly wool, and it makes it really easy to throw on and comfy. I do wish I'd maybe knit a little bit bigger because there isn't a ton of positive ease, so I can't comfortably wear a like normally fitting short sleeve t-shirt under this. Like, I'm wearing kind of a tank top under this, and I do prefer to wear a layer under my sweaters. So in hindsight, I do kind of wish it was a little bit bigger, but it's not a major issue. The pattern also has optional bust shaping, which I did not include because I wasn't looking for something, again, that close fitting, but it's nice to have the option if you do have a greater difference between your bust and your waist measurements. Ysolda is always really thoughtful about how she designs her patterns to make sure that they have appropriate fit options for most any bodies. I didn't have any issues with the pattern itself. I had to lengthen the sleeves, but I think I actually managed to get them, well, when I raised them up, obviously you can't see, but it looks about bracelet length there, but it does kind of hit about like that, which is about right. I always have the problem where I want to stop knitting the sleeves too soon, so I'm glad I persevered and kept knitting. And then I had knit the collar originally about, I think it was an inch or an inch and a half is what the pattern calls for, and it was just doing like way out, which is not what I like. So I did have to go back and lengthen the collar, and I haven't blocked it since then, so I think I'm maybe getting a little bit of flaring occasionally on the collar, but hopefully blocking it will sort that out, and then it'll be just right. So all in all, really happy with this project. Again, it's an Anyday Sweatshirt by Ysolda, and it's just a comfy throw-on piece. It can be casual. I think I could probably wear it to the office and it look pretty nice, and I do really love how it shows off this color. I'd say this is a pretty accurate representation on the screen. It maybe looks a little bit more blue than it is in real life. I'd say in real life it's maybe a touch more green, but yeah, it's just a really lovely tonal hand-dyed yarn. So my next project, my next finished object, is also a sweater, and it is this. So this is the Cloud Blouse by Petite Knit. Well, my take on the Cloud Blouse, because I've actually changed a lot of the details that make the original Cloud Blouse what it is. But it worked for kind of my kind of Christmas festive type sweater. I think you can see, yeah, you can see there a little bit of the shimmer. And I knit this in Drops Brushed Alpaca Silk in Off-White and Drops Glitter, which is this gold strand that you can hold alongside your yarn, just to add a bit of glitter or a bit of shine to any project that you want. And then obviously Brushed Alpaca Silk is just kind of a plain, slightly thicker than mohair fluffy strand. I wanted something that felt festive, a little bit glittery, kind of fluffy, and this is what I landed on. My original goal was to have it ready for Christmas. It was not ready for Christmas. I was still knitting it, and kind of knit it between that week of Christmas and New Year, but I did finish it in time to wear it for New Year's Eve, so that was really exciting. How it's ended up fitting, this is again a drop shoulder pattern, and I think it's interesting to see, if you look at that, like that is just more of a 90-degree square corner between the sleeve and the body, whereas the pattern I'm wearing, again, you can see there's a bit more of a curve, and there's like a gusset included in the pattern, which makes that fit a bit nicer. Well, I don't have an issue with how this fits, but it just means there's less fabric kind of bunching up underneath your arms. So yeah, I didn't actually do the details that make this the Cloud Blouse, which has pearl edges and pearl detailing. I think it has a pearl line on the shoulders where you pick up there would be a pearl line, and I think along the seams here, and then the edgings are just kind of like reverse stockinette rolled, which isn't really to my taste. I was mostly looking for a pattern that I could base this on. I had a little bit of a vision in my head, and I was looking for something with the appropriate gauge. So I instead did 2x2 ribbing on the collar and sleeves, or not the collar, sorry, the sleeves and the hem. And you can see I also did a split hem, and it's a little bit longer in the back than it is in the front. And then the collar is a 1x1, kind of a mock neck, although I'll put it on and show you how it fits. It's not quite, it's not, maybe not 100% how I envisioned it, but I don't know if there's anything I want to do to fix it. I'll let you see. So here it is on, and I think blocking this actually made it a little bit more awkward than it was when I wore it first, because the neckline is quite, there's not a lot of neckline shaping. It's quite like rectangular almost, which is fine when the pattern calls for the neckline to be a little bit more like that. And as you can see, if I folded it down, it would just kind of be this little like very vintage almost styling collar. Like this, it's, I don't know, I feel like it flares out to the sides a bit more than I would want it to. So I'm not sure if there's anything I actually want to do about this or if it's like good enough. As you can see when I stand up, this is how it fits. It's a nice drop shoulder, split hem, relatively close fitting again. Can tuck it in. These are not the best trousers to show, but like I wore it like tucked into like a silk skirt or for New Year's, and I liked that. So I like the fit overall. The collar is maybe a wee bit wonky, but I'm probably only going to wear this around the holidays, so good enough. And like I said, I may decide to like fold it down, or just, I don't know, would making it even longer to do a double folded one that's about this length make it better? Hard to say. So yeah, the collar's doing its thing. It's a mock neck situation. My gauge was slightly off to what the pattern called for, because the pattern is written to hold 2 strands of mohair together. So I ended up knitting the size 5, which is a large, to give me the measurements of a size 4. And I ended up using a size 5 or 3.75 millimeter needle just to get the fabric that I liked. It's quite cozy. It's not overly itchy. I do think sometimes I have problems with itchiness, and this isn't itchy in the same way that like a really rustic wool is itchy. Alpaca is kind of its own beast, so it's itchy in the way that alpaca can be itchy, but it's not crazy, and I don't think it's as itchy as a mohair would be. So it's definitely something I can manage. It's manageable. So yeah, that is my cloud blouse, and I am really happy with how it turned out in the end. I feel if I could sort the collar out and figure out what I wanted to do with that, I mean, I could just go back and actually make it the pearl edging. Maybe that would be better. It's just like, why is it so flat? If it was closer fitting, maybe that would be better. But yeah, overall, I am really happy with this project. The rest of my finished objects are all accessories. So first up, we have these, which are the Thicksgiving Socks by Summer Lee. And this is actually the first pair of DK socks that I've ever knit. These are knit in Zeezee Textiles Classic Fingering, as well as a little bit of Cascade Heritage for the darker green accent color. And it's just a nice skein of 100% superwash merino. So I didn't know what I wanted to do with that skein of yarn. It was something I'd received in a yarn swap, and one skein of fingering weight superwash merino is not really a great amount. Like, you wouldn't really use it for fingering weight socks because there's no nylon in it, so they would wear through really quickly, which I've learned from experience and done that accidentally. And it's not enough for like a shawl or a scarf, or, well, maybe enough for like a Sophie scarf or something, but I wouldn't really wear a scarf in this variegated yarn. It's kind of like greens and browns, almost like camo colors. So I decided if I held it double and reinforced the heels and toes with an actual sock yarn that has nylon in it, it would probably stand up to being used in socks a bit better. And I wanted to knit some DK weight socks for quite a long time and just hadn't ever got around to it. I've had this pattern in my library for probably a few years, and it was an interesting new cast on, like a new project for me to cast on for Christmas, and I knit this between Christmas and New Year's as well. I actually didn't really follow the pattern that well because the pattern is written cuff down, and I needed to do toe up because I'd tried the pattern one time before, and with the recommended like needle size and stitches to cast on for my size foot, which would give me like a size 3, I think she has, I don't know if there's 3 or 4 sizes in the pattern, but I should have cast it on the size for like a 9-inch foot. I do have quite big feet, which means socks take me a little bit longer to knit. I wish I was as fortunate as some people who have smaller feet. So I knew before that like size to cast on for if I was doing cuff down was way too big. So I decided to cast on toe up so that I could just increase to the appropriate size and then stop, and then figure out based on what stitch number I had which size of the pattern I was closest to. So I did that, which meant that I ended up knitting the smallest size with size 4 needles or 3.5 millimeters. I didn't actually take a gauge swatch after the fact, so maybe my gauge was just off, but it was fine. Like, it's not hard to knit toe up socks. I do have to do a little bit of kind of figuring out exactly what to do around the foot, because my normal, or like around the heel flap and gusset, my normal, like I normally don't knit DK weight socks, so I wasn't quite sure of the numbers, and needed to figure out exactly like how many stitches to leave for the heels and like how many stitches to increase and so on. So I'd say they're maybe a wee bit shorter than they should be, but if it's fine. And now that I know actually what size that I need to knit, that means like in future, if I want to do another pattern or another pair of these, I mean, which I most likely will because they're really cozy and really warm and I love wearing them around the house, I can just knit the pattern as designed from the cuff down because I already know which size is going to fit me. So yeah, really happy with these overall, and I have been wearing them just around the house for the most part. I don't particularly love wearing DK weight socks in shoes. I just find them to be really quite thick, and hand knit socks are already a bit thicker than like a commercial sock that you would just get from the store. So these are my things to keep my feet cozy around the house when I'm wearing my slippers and whatnot, which also means they should last a bit longer because you don't get really quite as much wear in your socks around the house as you would if you were out and about and wearing them in shoes. My next finished object is also an accessory, and it is a hat, and it's actually one of 3 hats that I'm going to show you. So this is called Loomed, and it is a pattern from Brooklyn Tweed, and I knit this in my handspun yarn. So here's the leftover yarn. It's kind of, I guess, like brown from a distance, but if you look closely, it almost is kind of peachy, pinky, brown, quite a unique color. It's got a lot of different colored fibers blended up in there. I saw that Brooklyn Tweed had a preview knit call out last quarter. I think they just have one out now as well for the spring one, so take a look at that if you're interested in preview knitting. It was a relatively positive experience. It's kind of like test knitting, but without all the work of actually providing tester feedback, because they've already had it tech edited, so they're really just looking for people to like do a preview knit, and it's almost like an advertising thing. But I chose to sign up for this because the pattern really, like the texture really intrigued me. And it's called Loomed, which might give you an idea of what it's kind of meant to look like a woven texture. So if you look closely, there's almost like a crosshatch woven pattern there. And that's made up purely from a slip stitch pattern. It's not overly difficult, but it's been long enough ago, I knit this in like 2 or 3 days, that I would have to go look at the pattern again to be able to describe it. But basically, the horizontal weave texture is caused by holding the yarn in front when you are slipping stitches. So effectively you're creating floats on the front of the fabric rather than the back of the fabric. This has a double folded knit brim, which is you cast on, and then I think I cast on provisionally and then you knit it together, which is really nice. It makes a kind of really cozy, squishy, kind of commercial feeling knit brim, which I do quite like. I knit that, I believe, on like size 5 needles, and then the actual body of the hat is knit in like size 8 needles, which, I don't know, maybe you can see my hands through it a little bit. It's quite an airy fabric. So it's never going to be the hat that I wear when I want to be super warm, if it's a windy day outside, something like that. I don't actually know what I'm going to do with it. I may end up donating it or like offering it to Cameron or I don't know, a family member, because there's only so many hats that you can wear. But it was a fun experience. It was definitely like a process knit because I was curious about the texture, and I would recommend it. I did make some adjustments to the pattern. I, as written, the pattern is quite short, so I added repeats. You can see in the project photos that it comes down to like about here. It's one of these little short caps. That's not like to my taste personally. Yeah, and like I said, my gauge was also a bit off, so I also cast on one less repeat around. But overall, I like the finished product well enough, and it, like I said, it was a good process knit, and I was curious about the texture. So that is my Loomed Hat in handspun. I was really on a hat kick recently, so this is my next project, my next finished object, and this is the June hat. This is one in a series of free patterns from, I believe, Kelborn Woolens, and this was purely knit to use up some stash yarn. It's a kind of a background goal that I have, is to start working through more of my stash. Well, that's not a background goal, but to use up some of these odds and ends that are great for hat patterns or small projects. And there's definitely a local charity, a couple local charities actually, who help refugees who are always taking winter hats, or if I don't give them it like in time for this year, I can certainly do so in winter next year. So I think it's a good use of my stash yarn, my scrap yarn, and they're kind of a nice like breather in between big projects. So it's like instant gratification because this only takes a few days. So this is a really easy pattern. Again, it might not be the most super cozy because it only is one layer. And this was yarn that's been in my stash for quite a while. The black kind of charcoal gray is Rico Soft Merino Aran, and then the kind of cream, I think there's some percentage of alpaca in it, but honestly that's been in my stash since like, it's been in my stash since college, and I've been done with college since for the last 8 years. So yeah, that's been in there for a while. So this was a great pattern to use up some stash. It's like a slip stitch pattern, so it's in reverse stockinette, and then the lines are just slip stitches, and I actually knit it inside out so that I was knitting the whole thing, and then rather than purling the whole thing, and then I turned it right side out when I was done. So yeah, that's a great little pattern, super easy, not too much to say about that. My next project and final finished object is again another hat, and it is more hand spun. And it actually might be getting frogged. So this pattern is Easwas by Kate Davies, and it's from a book that I got for Christmas, Sark. It's a really lovely book. It's made up of a lot of patterns with twisted and kind of textural stitches, which you can see an example of here. So these aren't traditional cables here, it's all different types of twisted stitches. There's a lot of really geometric patterns. This is made from handspun again, from wool that came from my aunt and uncle's farm, where my grandparents also live. They raise sheep just for like meat, but they don't really do anything with the wool. And when I was back home for my wedding last year, we ended up visiting them, and there was just some wool laying on the ground, well, in bags, in garbage bags basically. They weren't going to do anything with it, probably put it literally in the bin, just as many people do all around the world. Wool is not usually the primary reason that people are growing sheep at this point. Certainly for a lot of people anyways, it ends up being a waste product. So I took some just to see what it was like. I had no idea if it was nice, but it turns out to be really actually quite nice. So this is the finished hat, and I do have some wool left over. However, my intention was to knit it and then like send it back to them so that they could see what actually came off the sheep that they were growing. But I'll put it on. I'm not that pleased with the length of it, so I think I might undo it. I don't know. You guys let me know what you think, because obviously if I'm knitting a gift, I want it to be used. And this is a little bit tighter than I would normally wear a hat. Although now that I put it on and like look in the camera, it's not so bad. My little cousin is a teenager. She could maybe wear it. I don't know. She maybe wouldn't want to be fair. But like, I have a normal woman-sized head, normal human-sized head. Like my aunt could probably wear it. I don't know. I'm of two minds. Because I didn't want to undo it because there's obviously a textured pattern. It took some work, and it would be hard to lengthen it because of the way that the pattern of the brim is like flows into the actual pattern of the hat, so you can't just like rip back the ribbing and lengthen it this way. You'd need to undo the entire hat. So I basically decided in my head that I was just gonna undo the entire hat. But I've now put it on again and it's like, maybe it's acceptable. I don't know. What do we think? Is that an acceptable size hat? I mean, it isn't like overly tight. It just is not as long as I would want it. I can't decide. Let me know what you think in the comments, whether I should like rip this out and start again on a pattern that will actually ensure that this gets worn, or if you think this looks fine. So if it was just for me, I probably would leave it, because it's a gift. I do want it to be worn. So yeah, this pattern is out of this book. I'd say it's a decent book. It's a little bit repetitive. Like, there's like a cowl that uses a very similar texture to this. There's 12 different patterns, but like I'm sure 2 of them are a cardigan and a pullover version of the same thing. So it's nice enough, and I'll probably wear, I would probably make, well, I've already made this hat, and I would probably make this pullover as well. So I think that probably does make it worth it, as it was 22 pounds. Maybe if I made 3 patterns out of it, I would feel like it was worth the purchase price. Actually, there's probably 3 patterns. So I probably would make 3 out of 12, because this is a lovely textured pullover as well. So yeah, it's a great pattern from an interesting book. Moving on to works in progress, and again, I do have quite a few. This is just what I've been working on recently. There are certainly more if you want to go look at my Ravelry page and see the full honest truth of how many works in progress I have at any one time. The first one is a project I've been working on for an embarrassing amount of time for my husband. Well, he wasn't my husband when I first started knitting it, so that should give you some sense. And this is a cardigan. It is called the Longfellow, and it's by Michelle Wang. This is a lightweight fitted cardigan that I am knitting in Woolly Knit Merino 4-ply in the color Tierra Beige Nepp. And here is the back panel. So I've had a lot of the biggest parts of it done for quite some time. The back and the front panels have been done for a while. It's a lovely kind of tweedy beige. Here are both the front panels. They look hilarious, like this. I keep thinking it doesn't look big enough, but I think it's just because they're curling under. Fingers crossed, because it's not exactly the easiest thing to go back and redo, given that it's all knit and seamed. It's got these little pockets as well, which you kind of knit at the same time. So there's a pocket lining. I don't exactly know how that actually goes together, but I'm sure I'll figure it out. So those have been done for a while. And then I had started the sleeves and had to rip them out because they weren't wide enough, which was annoying. But I restarted them, well, and then it went on hold for a while, because then I had to figure out exactly how much width I needed to add. And so I didn't know exactly how many stitches I needed to cast on, so I had to do some math and figure that out. But here are the sleeves, which I'm knitting 2 at a time. It's all knit flat and seamed. Honestly, the sleeves, no, they're not wider than the front panel. For a second, I thought the sleeve was wider than the front panel. I was like, we have some serious issues here. Well, they're not far off. I guess the front panel gets the button band added as well. Anyways, I'm sure it'll be fine. So I'm nearly to the part, I'm nearly to the sleeve cap. This stitch marker, I needed to add another 1.5 inches from there. And if you think stockinette and the round is boring, stockinette back and forth is like soul destroying. I'm very ready for this project to be done. Although I did at least say to him when I first started knitting it that there was no deadline and I wasn't doing deadline knitting anymore. So that's positive. I feel a little bit less pressure, but you know, coming up on 2 years is like getting a bit ridiculous. So I just need to buckle down and get it done. And I'm really nearly there. So once I knit the sleeve caps, then you seam it all together and it'll be a matter of doing the button band and finishing off the pocket edging. And I don't really mind seaming. It's pretty straightforward if you know how to do like mattress stitch. You just kind of need to get in the flow of it and make sure as well that all of your shoulder and your sleeves are kind of pinned in the right way. But it's not too bad. You just need to have enough time to do it. My gauge was a little bit off because woolly knit 4-ply is quite a light fingering weight, and I think it's a Brooklyn tweed pattern. I believe it called for whatever their Brooklyn tweed fingering weight yarn is. I can't remember what that one is, but it tends to be a little bit plumper yarn than the woolly knit. I'm pretty happy with how it is turning out so far. The fabric is nice, and I think it will be very wearable once it's done. Again, it's kind of a closer fit project, so we shall see. The one thing that does make me a little bit nervous about knit flat projects is that they, like, you don't know for sure if it's going to work out until you finish the whole thing and sew it together. So that's always a little bit nerve-wracking. But I am optimistic that it will be okay. And I'm nearly there. I'm at the finish line. I can see the finish line. So that is taking a lot of my time lately, just because I want to get it done. The next project that I'm working on is also for my husband, and it's for his birthday, which is coming up at the beginning of March. And it's a pair of socks. These are the, wow, you can really see the pooling in this light. I was hoping it wasn't that bad, but in the natural light, I think it looks a lot worse. Anyways, these are the Berries and Birdtracks socks. It's a pattern by Yucca, and it is from 52 Weeks of Socks Volume 2. Let me just put my hand in so you can see the texture a bit more. I think this is looking like the yarn is fighting a bit more with the pattern than it is in real life. I feel in real life, what you see first is the pattern, whereas on the camera and in the natural light, I think it's picking up the kind of spiraling color changes. But yeah, in real life, the texture is definitely what stands out more. So that's positive. I'm knitting these on, I think, size 1 needles as called for. I'm basically knitting the pattern exactly how it's written. And this yarn is called Thunderstone, and it's a Seismic yarn butter sock in the color Thunderstone. This is a yarn that Cameron picked out when we were actually on holiday in San Francisco a couple years ago, which is something I think I've mentioned before, that we tend to do a lot of souvenir yarn shopping, but I've stopped doing it with sock yarn because I'm getting a little bit of a backlog, so I thought it was about time that I started working through that. I'm enjoying the pattern so far. It is like more time consuming than most socks that I knit because I do tend to knit a lot of plain vanilla socks as kind of my take along anywhere with me projects. So this obviously requires that I look at the chart, but it isn't overly difficult. It just is something I need to pay attention to the chart when I'm knitting it. You can see the actual pattern here. That shows the texture a little bit better. I don't think it's particularly like masculine or feminine. I think it works either way. So yeah, it should be a nice project once it's finally all knit up. I'm currently just on the gusset and should be coming along to turn the heel soon. I have been focusing a little bit more on his jumper or his cardigan, but we're on holiday in a few weeks, so I'm intending to take that project along and get it finished then. The next project I'm working on is actually a test knit for the Crevea, a Rebecca Clow. It's just a little scarf project. It's so very, well, I was going to say very straightforward. Straightforward in the sense that it doesn't take as much time to knit as a sweater. Not straightforward in the way that it was originally written, and it's needed a lot of figuring out exactly what's meant, but it's in a better place now. I think Rebecca quite likes dip stitches. I believe maybe her first pattern that she released used dip stitches. And this is a kind of little mini scarf shawlette, kind of in the style of the Sophie scarf, or that shape anyways, written using dip stitches. And here is what mine looks like. I fully admit that I should have chosen a different yarn to go with this texture, but if I go in closer, hopefully you can see there's a bit more of the 3D nature of it. I wanted to spin a yarn, and then I spun it, and then I realized that the yarn might not actually be the best choice for the texture, but I'd spun it already, so I just decided to go ahead and knit it because the feedback about how the pattern's actually written is a little bit more important than the actual finished product, and it didn't bother me enough that I wanted to restart it yet again. But basically, how the pattern was originally written was just not coming across as clearly as it could. I think just because of how dip stitches are, they're a little bit harder to chart, is my understanding. I've seen it done successfully in the past where they've actually had, pattern writers actually had the dip stitch illustrated, which made it very clear as to where exactly you needed to dip into. So yeah, the way that she wrote it out originally to describe where to dip each of the dip stitches didn't 100% make sense. And also, I don't know, it was just, there was a lot of people in the test group that were not originally, like, it wasn't clicking with, including me. I definitely restarted a few times. The pattern is fairly intuitive once you actually get into it, and once you like figure out, like, you get into the flow of it basically. But translating that actual pattern, which is actually relatively intuitive, actually explaining that to someone, especially via words and charts and whatever, a pattern, isn't always as easy as it might seem. So I think with the feedback from the test group, it has definitely turned into a lot more understandable pattern, but it took a minute to get there. And I'm not one who usually struggles with patterns. So yeah, it's been an interesting experience, but I think it should be a nice enough scarf once it's done. The actual handspun was fun to make. It is using Shetland alpaca and some blue sari silk, which is what has made it this blue color. I think my alpaca is maybe a wee bit like hairy, so it's maybe a little bit pokey on the neck. I don't know if I'm gonna keep the finished object or not. And it's kind of more process, spin, and knit, to be honest. And the process of spinning it and blending the bat was really fun. I like making bats a lot. That's maybe one of my favorite parts of spinning. I also like spinning, but I also really like making bats. Anyways, so yeah, definitely a process project rather than like something I'm really excited to have the finished object of. So yeah, that is the Torrin Scarf by Rebecca Clow. The last thing I'm working on is a GIF, and it is a little baby jumper. And this is called French Macaroon. Basically, like, you knit like a T shape in garter stitch and seam it together, except I've adapted the pattern not to so I don't have to seam it. So yeah, you can see there's a slip stitch faux seam there instead. And then I finished the front, and I'm now working on the back. There's just stitches on hold. This is the 3-month size, and I'm knitting it in Cascade Ultra Pima. I don't really have that much to say about this project. Like, it's pretty straightforward. I'm using a really useful project that's on Ravelry already as a reference as far as how I want to edit the pattern in order to be able to knit it in the round. Because the pattern as written is fairly sparse, which is fine if you're just like knitting 2 T's and then seaming them together. It can be quite sparse, and baby sweaters don't really need quite as much shaping. So it's been an interesting learning experience. I still can't decide what my approach to baby yarn is. I don't want to use wool particularly because I know parents don't really have the time to wash wool, even if it's superwash. But I don't love constantly buying acrylic and man-made fibers. But I think I might just like go with it in some of the future projects I have to work on. I will just use acrylic just because ease of washing. Like, this is cotton, it should be pretty easy to wash, but it's also it's a different texture. It's a bit heavier than like a fluffy kind of lighter weight acrylic. So yeah, that's been interesting to think about. But yeah, no major points about this particular knit. It's not that hard. It's a bunch of garter stitch, and there's not that much shaping. So yeah, it's a free pattern if you're interested in that. There's a lot of cute versions on Ravelry. Very last thing I'll mention that I've just started swatching for is the Agnete Cardigan, which I mentioned in my last video. I feel like this is coming up more brown looking on camera, Obviously this is a sari silk and then a Corriedale. The sari silk is a more brown leaning gray, but like if I look at it here off camera, it doesn't look as brown as it looks on camera, if that makes sense. Like this looks a bit more marled on the camera than it does when I'm just looking at it in real life. But anyways, it's a brioche fabric. This was with the recommended size needles, and this is one size up. So I need to see if that's going to give me gauge or not. I felt like this fabric was a little bit too tight. And I like, you know, you want brioche to be a bit squishy, not just dense. So yeah, I haven't quite decided. Yeah, I'm only like an inch into the next size up needles, if that's a bit more what I'm looking for or not. But yeah, that's really going to be a fun project that I'm looking forward to having finished. Well, looking forward to actually properly casting on once I'm done with a few of these gift knits. And then yeah, I'm looking forward to the process in general because I like brioche and I do really want the finished object. The last thing I'll talk about is the major spinning project that I'm working on right now, and it is this. I think I may have shown this yarn already once. It's a combo spin. I'm on the last bobbin, so here are two of the bobbins that I have done. So you can see there's a darker fiber in there as well, and this is the fiber that I have left to spin. So these two bobbins have an additional darker fiber that has that kind of purple and green, the darker purple and green in it. And then this fiber that I have left is a lot more kind of pastel, soft greens, blues, purples. But it's, once it's all plied, it makes this kind of lovely, I don't know, sage leaning bluish green. Like from a distance, it's not dissimilar from the sweater I'm wearing, a little bit more blue toned. Yeah. But up close you can see how many different colors are actually in there. It's not particularly interesting as far as how I'm spinning it. It's basically short forward. I prepared all the yarn by dizzying it off through a hand card. If you don't know what that means, there's a video on my Instagram that explains it a bit more, but it's just a way to get a braid all nice and fluffy like this rather than compacted. So you can, and also it thins out the actual fiber, so it's much easier to spin from. So instead of spinning from a braid that's usually like about that thick, this is like, it's been pre-drafted, so it's a nice thin strip of fiber that spins up really nicely. So that is my current spinning. After I'm done with this project, which depending on how much I focus on it, I don't know, I could probably get it done like in a week. Just depends on how much time I have. But after that, I have a goal by the end of March to learn how to spin a cable ply yarn. And I said I like spinning up bats, or creating bats. I've made this bat to use to spin a cable ply yarn. A cable ply yarn, if you don't know, so a cable ply yarn works like this. So a basic kind of standard yarn, like that 3-ply yarn that I showed, the singles are spun in one direction, Z twist, and then they are plied in the opposite direction, S twist. And what that means is that it makes the plies kind of like push off each other and hold together. I'm really not describing that super well, but you can understand it if you kind of look at how any commercial yarn is spun. However, a cable yarn is spun in this way. So you have 4 plies and you spin them all in one direction, and then you ply 2 of them together twice. So you've got 4 plies, you have single pairs plied in a Z twist direction with twice the normal amount of twist, and then in the third step you then ply those already plied yarns, ply them again, S twist, and then it makes this like kind of pops out to look like a cable, like a rope. It's apparently meant to be quite good for socks. So this bat that I've blended up, it has, well, that white actually is some nylon. It has about 20% nylon and 80% wool. It's just purple fibers that I had mixed. Some pink in there as well. So that should be fun. So yeah, that's kind of in the spinning plans in the next month or so, is to give that a go. And I'm just trying to work on kind of developing my spinning a bit more, not just always spinning the same way, not getting stuck in a rut, but still learning how to do more different things. I think it's easy with knitting because there's different projects and you can see different techniques that you've never done before, but I feel like with spinning I have to make a bit more of an effort to like try something new and learn a different thing. So yeah, that's one of the things I'm gonna try to do with spinning. I'm also working on preparing some actual raw fleece, but I don't have tons to talk about with that. This has been washed. It might need another quick wash. I'm not sure if I got all the lanolin out. Yeah, it feels a wee bit greasy still. So this probably needs another wash and rinse. And then I can work on processing this as well. That is all I have to share with you today. If you made it to the end, thanks so much for hanging out with me for the last hour, 45 minutes, whatever it is. I really enjoyed being able to share an update with you. I'd love to hear how you keep learning and progressing your craft in the comments below if you want to share it with me. Do you think about adding new projects, or do you think about trying new projects intentionally to try and add to your arsenal of skills, or do you just kind of stick with what you know, or does it just depend? Like, do you see a project you like, and if it's got a new technique that you've never tried, you just go for it? It's always interesting to hear how people keep developing their knowledge, so I'd love to hear about that in the comments below. If you've enjoyed spending some time with me today, I'd appreciate a like and a subscribe if you want to hear more from me. And I'll see you again the next time. Bye for now.